UV or ultraviolet is a type of ray that comes off from the sun, and when it hit a certain type of skin, it could have different types of results. Sometimes you see a person stand in the sun for a while and they slowly turn beet red. But then you have some people that could stand in the sun for hours and nothing will happen, not even their skin color changes. In this video, we want to see why people have different types of skin color and why does the sun affect them differently. Weren't all humans the same, and didn't they all come from Africa? So in this case, why is a person white, black, brown, or something else? With the help of a skin color and the help of biology, we could see why a certain person has a certain type of skin. Your skin color has something to do called melanin. Melanin is basically a color pigment inside your skin cell, and it could be found in animals and humans. Not only does melanin cause your skin color to change, but it also causes your hair color to change as well. The melanin that sets your skin tone and color of your hair, they're in your skin cells called melanocyte. The amount of melanocyte in different types of skin colors are all the same, but it all depends what type of pigment the melanocyte wants to produce, and that all depends on the person and the climate they're living in, and obviously the genetics they had before. The melanin between white and black skin are very similar, and it changes hair color from jet black all the way to blonde. But there is another type of melanin, and this one causes a person to have red hair, and on top of that, they could develop freckles. It's good to know that different types of hairs and skins are not that old. We have to go back about 50,000 years ago. Scientists believe that between 50,000 years ago all the way to 100,000 years ago, ancient humans finally left Africa. And from Africa, they go to Asia and Europe. 100% of humans came from Africa. And since they all lived around the equator, they were exposed to a lot of sunlight, and everybody had darker skin. Let's go to the present and look at a white person. If a northerner like Scandinavia comes down around the equator, the ultraviolet of the sunlight in that area will damage the skin cells of this white person. The UV light is basically damaging the DNA inside the person's skin cells. The skin starts to turn red, and it's basically burning and it hurts. If they don't protect their skin underneath the sun, the skin will eventually develop skin cancer. But right now, we have sunscreen available everywhere, and you could easily apply it on your skin. But back in the day, ancient humans did not have sunscreen, so how did they survive under this brutal sunlight and didn't develop skin cancer? This is when evolution helps human beings out, and the melanin we talked about starts to develop in their skin cells. The amount of melanin in a person's skin determines the protection they received from the UV rays. The farther a human lives away from the equator, the lighter their skin gets. Like for example, in the Middle East, it's in the middle. They are not completely white like the northerners, and they're not completely black like people close to the equator. And in this case, the people in the middle do not get sunburned as easily. They turn tan, and the tan is temporary, because if you're not exposed to sunlight again, it will fade out and turn back to the original color. So if a person lived around the equator and they stayed there, they stayed dark skinned, and the ones that moved north, the more north they moved, the lighter their skin got. We're using Africa as an example, but in South India, there are a lot darker than North Indians. And in East Asia, Like for example, if you compare China and Indonesia, the Chinese are more light-skinned than the Indonesians. So what did evolution do in this situation? The reason a person around the equator is more dark-skinned, it causes the person to be less exposed to the UV light of the sun, and this allows you to have a shield and not develop skin cancer. You could say in this situation, a darker skin is like a shield against the sun. But this is where the question comes up. The ones that moved up north were dark-skinned because everybody came from Africa, and that's no different than the Middle East or Sweden. You guys should know, the more north you go, the colder it gets, and in this situation, you're less exposed to sunlight. So when you move this far away from the equator, this is when dark skin becomes a problem. So why is that? UV light is extremely bad for a person's skin, but it has something that's positive, and that's vitamin D. Vitamin D makes a person's bones much stronger, and it provides a human with calcium, magnesium, phosphate, and iron. If a person has vitamin D deficiency, not only will your bones get weaker, you will also be weaker as a person. If a dark-skinned person from Africa moved up north in a colder climate, because of their skin color, they got way less vitamin D than they're supposed to, and they turned weaker and weaker. Back then, they probably didn't realize that it's the dark skin causing the vitamin D deficiency. But when thousands of years pass in this situation, evolution will do its job, and it slowly makes that generation's skin lighter and lighter, and that helps the person get the vitamin D they always needed. So now we realize that the skin tone of a human all has to do with the sunlight and the amount of vitamin D they need. So the more north and colder you get, the whiter the person got, so they could get the amount of vitamin D for that little sunlight. The more south you go, they don't need vitamin D like them, but they need a shield against the UV light. So in this case, they have to have more melanin, and that causes their skin to get darker, and that protects the skin. So humans are not that different from one another. Just because we needed a certain type of vitamin D in a situation and to continue living, after thousands of years, depending on where we lived, our skin color changed. If you bring a northerner like a white person around the equator and tell them to live around these people, they could easily get sunburned constantly and actually develop skin cancer because of it. But if that's not the case, they have to use sunscreen or use an umbrella constantly. And if you look at it from the other side, if you bring a dark-skinned person around the North Pole, they could live up there, but they will be very weak. So they have to use vitamin D pills so they don't get vitamin D deficiency. In Europe and America, they always tell people that have melanin to always take vitamin D pills, and this goes for people around the equator, even around the Middle East. So it's this simple. This is how we turn into different colors. And some people think that we're different from one another. We were basically all the same before all this. And it's all because of this that chose the skin color of different people in different parts of the world. Some people might ask, why are African Americans that have been living here for hundreds of years not change color? We said this plenty of time. But this is not how evolution works, because it does not work this quick. It's not about 10, 20, 200, 300 years. What evolution is will take thousands upon thousands of years. It might even take longer, because back in the day, darker skinned people did not have vitamin D available to them, obviously, and they couldn't take a pill. So this causes the person to always have the vitamin D they need, whatever climate they live in. So the evolution will be very confusing. The USSR was made up of 15 different republics. In the 1950s, this picture was handed to the Soviet police so they could point out the different races that live in this country, and they would use it to determine what type of a race a certain person was. Obviously, this was not right, and after Stalin died, they got rid of it. And a lot of the different republics realized that this picture was given to the police so they could point out the non-Russians. Throughout history, a way a person looked was always very important. Not only the way we look or the people around us, but the people that live all over the world. Like for example, in the year 1870, a psychologist by the name of Cesar Lombroso wrote that you can tell if somebody's bad or good based on how they look. He even has a book about it with pictures. Lombroso wrote in his book that if your nose is pointy, you are an anarchist. If you have a wide jaw, you are a criminal. You could say this book was not worth a damn because it was just all made up stories. It was obvious he was saying negative things for people that didn't have the looks he liked. In this era, Francis Galton, a British writer, was interested in this book, and the knowledge he gained was very questionable, and he wouldn't believe that you could point out different types of people based on how they look like. Sir Galton was not gonna give up that easy, so he went to different police stations and got different mugshots from the police. He brought all types of criminal photos all over England and brought them to a laboratory to stack on top of each other. And after, he shined a light on it. What he was trying to do is combine all the pictures together to see what type of a face he sees. Every time he did that, he would see a normal looking dude. And it was the same result for different types of women. You could say Francis Galton realized that Lombroso's book was full of crap and it didn't make any sense. What Francis Galton did, we can all do online now. There is a website online called faceresearch.org. You could take any types of picture from all over the world and stack it on top of each other. There's even pictures from different countries all over the world on what the average person looks like. When you look at these pictures, one important thing comes to mind. Why do people all over the world look so different from one another? Didn't we all come from Africa thousands of years ago? If you've seen our video about why we have different colors, you'll know why that happens. So in this clip, we want to see why we have different facial features. Just like our previous video, we said ancient humans came out of Africa about 100 to 200,000 years ago. They entered the Middle East and scattered everywhere. One branch goes to Europe and another branch goes to India. Then after India, they go towards Australia, and about 35,000 years ago, another branch goes to Siberia. Scientists believe the people that went to Siberia went over the icy bridge and entered North America through Alaska. With this method, they separate all over the world. The ones that passed through Alaska and entered North America for the very first time, it was less than 1,000 of them. So scientists suggest that the ancestors of Native Americans comes from less than 1,000 people. And about 13,000 years ago, the sea level rises and closes off the bridge forever. In our previous video, we talked about why we have different skin colors, but why do we look different? The way we look also has something to do with the geography of the place we live in. One of the main questions we received is that why do Eastern Asian countries have a slightly thinner eyes? If you remember what we said before, a series of people went to Siberia, and in Siberia there is snow everywhere. The snow causes the sun to reflect much harder. So for the people that live there, they were forced to squint so they don't get blinded by the sun and the snow reflection together. That is why they evolve and create another type of eyelid, an eyelid that has a little bit of fat on the end of it. A person from Eastern Asia only has a slightly different eyelid than somewhere else, but the eyeball and the eye itself is no different. The people that went to Siberia scatter throughout Eastern Asia, and just like we said, a small population from Siberia goes through Alaska and enters North America for the first time. You could also see the same eyelid in Native Americans. We could say that the Eskimos that lived in Siberia a long time ago created the first sunglasses. They only left a little slight opening so they could walk in the snow while the sun was out. Another question we received is that why do people from different parts of the world have a bigger nose or a smaller nose? And on top of that, why do some people have a smaller lips or bigger lips? Scientists believe that this all relates to breathing. The hotter and drier the weather, the more breathing power you need. And that is why people that live in hotter areas have bigger lips and bigger noses, and this allows you to breathe more effectively. The more effective your breathing is, the more oxygen you can give to your lungs, so your performance is much better in a hotter climate. The evolution caused us in hotter areas to have a bigger nose, and you could see it in Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean area. Another thing that a hot weather can cause is bigger lips. Archaeologists and scientists believe that when we all came from Africa, we had bigger noses and bigger lips. Also, our ears were bigger. But the more we moved up north and to colder climate, we didn't need bigger noses. Because it's good to know, a bigger nose, bigger lips, and even bigger ears is actually not helpful at all in the colder climate, because it causes you to get colder faster. That is why the people that moved up north, they evolved and got these things smaller and smaller. One of the biggest difference is seen in the ear as well. In colder climates, some people don't even have earlobes. Another question that people ask is that why do they consider East Asians yellow, or why do they call Native Americans red? Unfortunately, all these names come back to racism, and both of the names came from Europeans. The British hated the Mongols, that is why they called East Asian people yellow people, but that's not the case. The same story happened for Native Americans. Because they wanted a different name for them instead of Indians, they called them Redskins, but they are not redskin, they're mostly brown. And the more southern you go and the closer you get to the equator, the more dark skin they get. Cells are the smallest living organisms. Every cell in the world has three things in common. All of them have a cell membrane, which is also called a plasma membrane, and you can kind of consider it the protector of the cell, or the wall. The second thing that every cell has in common is the cytoplasm, which is the gooey liquid inside the cell where everything is located in. The third thing that every cell has is DNA, and sometimes is inside the nucleus, and other times it's not. If you want to put it in simple terms, the DNA of the cell is the genetic information of that cell. There are two types of cells in the world: the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. Eukaryotic cells are more complicated than the other ones, and you could find this type of cell inside animals, humans, and plants. The other type of cell, like we said, is the prokaryote cell. This one is much simpler than the other one. These types of cells do not have a nucleus like the eukaryote. It has the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, and the DNA in the center. And the DNA is just free flowing, and it's not inside a nucleus because it doesn't have one. And that's the main difference between the prokaryote and the eukaryote. One has a nucleus and this one doesn't. There are a lot of bacteria that are prokaryote cells, but not all prokaryote cells are bacteria. And as you know, all bacteria is not bad. Unlike eukaryotes, prokaryote cells will never multiply like they do. They will always stay as a single cell organism. Like when you look at the human liver, this is made up of eukaryotic cells. They basically multiply, hold each other's hands, and produce an organ. But a prokaryote cell will never be able to do that. Let's get to know eukaryotic animal cells first. Inside these cells, we have organelles, or in simple terms, the main parts of a cell. Like for example, the nucleus is the most important part, and that's counted as an organelle. You could consider the nucleus the control center of the entire cell. And just like we said before, inside the nucleus, there is the DNA. If you've seen our video about DNA in simple terms, you'll know that the DNA is a code, and the code is given so they can produce different types of proteins. When a cell is trying to multiply and raise its population, the DNA that's inside the nuclei will start producing chromosomes. When chromosomes is being made, the nuclei does something else. It starts producing ribosomes. The ribosomes inside the cell are the ones that produce proteins with the help of the RNA. You could kind of consider ribosomes as a 3D printer, where they get the code from the DNA and start producing protein. There are vesicles inside and outside of a cell, which look like this, and you could kind of consider them a sac. When ribosomes produce protein, they're given to these vesicles. You could also consider the vesicles as the carrier of the protein. When these tiny sacs pick up the protein, they go somewhere very important, a place called the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus is an engineering marvel, and it's amazing how it works. It accepts the protein from these little sacs and starts modifying the protein. The Golgi apparatus can do pretty much anything with the protein like it wants. Add carbohydrates to it or lipid. But let's go to the next thing on the list, a section called the lysosome. The lysosome's job is extremely important, but it's not complicated like the Golgi apparatus. You could consider it the garbage collector of a cell. It's like a balloon that hovers around the cells, and if it sees trash, it annihilates it and basically eliminates it inside the bubble. You might say, why is there garbage inside the cell? By garbage, we mean parts of the cells that have stopped working or are not working correctly. And if they remain inside the cell, they will do more damage than good, so they have to be eliminated by the lysosome. The most amount of things the lysosome eliminates is ribosomes that are not working correctly or have died off. Another section of a cell is the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of a cell. In simple terms, they give energy to the cell. All cells don't have the same amount of mitochondria. It all depends to the energy they need. Some need more, some need way less. Based on the energy needed for that cell, the mitochondria number will increase. Like for example, in the human body, the part that needs the most amount of mitochondria is the heart, and they need the most out of any other body part. You might not believe it, but the cells that make up your heart have about 5,000 mitochondria in each of them. After your heart cells, the most amount of mitochondria is in a sperm cell, and it's a little bit less than 5,000 mitochondria. So with all this going on inside the cell, why doesn't it just collapse? How does it stay together? The reason it doesn't fall apart is because it has a skeleton. It's called the cytoskeleton. But the skeleton is not made from bone like a human. It's made up of string-looking material that's basically protein, and it holds the entire cell together and doesn't allow it to collapse. If the cell we're telling you about has chloroplast inside it, that means it's a plant cell. The chloroplast is a part of a plant cell that does the most important thing, photosynthesis. In simple terms, this part of the cell accepts the sunlight from the sky, it gets water from the root of the plant, it also takes in carbon dioxide from the air, and when it collects all of this, it gives oxygen in return, produces energy for the plant to stay alive and grow, and it also produces sugar for itself. Animal cells have a skeleton, which we said is called the cytoskeleton, made up of protein. But in a plant cell, instead of a cytoskeleton, it has a cell wall that holds everything together. It's interesting to know that in the human body, the only cell that has a tail is a sperm cell. This part of the cell is called the flagellum, or in simple terms, the tail. Most cells that have a tail or a flagellum are bacterias. Our entire body and existence is made up of these cells. If the cells are alive, then we are alive. If they are young, then we are young. When you get older, your cells will also get older, and replacing them will become slower and slower. Most cells' life are extremely short. Like your skin cell only lasts between 2 to 4 weeks. In a young person's body, these cells will replace itself immediately, and that is why the person looks young, because it has brand new cells. But the older you get, the speed of replacing slows down, and that is why you look older. Another example is that your liver cells last 300 days, and if you eat too much alcohol, you will kill off these cells and damage your liver because it has to keep replacing cells that you kill with alcohol. Your heart has one of the longest lifespan for a cell. Each cell lasts about 4.5 years. But compared to the cells inside your brain, also known as the neurons, they are nothing. Because your neurons are basically supposed to last your lifetime, and they're never supposed to die. They will last this long unless you take brain damage, have a stroke, use drugs that heavily impact your brain. All these could damage and kill off the neurons, and they won't be replaced. And in long terms, this could lead to other sicknesses like Alzheimer's. When you smoke cigarettes, the smoke directly affects the cells inside your body, especially your lungs. When it kills off your cells, and this lasts a very long time, it could lead to cancer. I hope this video taught you to learn more about your body and take care of it a little bit better.